Alright, so this is a project overview for class 3287 databases. The project basically, general overview, it builds a ice rink database. So the project overview, basically proposing to build this database that would be used compiling public information from several ice rinks in the area where I am. The idea came up between friends, so it was a real idea thought of that should be created. So this is the first hack at building the backend database part of it. So therefore, the project will consist of compiling data sources and then querying the data. And that'll be done on a MySQL database on the Google Cloud platform, and then the interaction with that will be done through a Jupyter notebook. So it's really trying to simulate the database part of everything and kind of get away from the front end, getting bogged down in the front end. But it would eventually be part of a website, so that is part of the idea process. And basically, yeah, so I'll demonstrate those parts of basically designing the database, getting the data, and then querying that database in kind of real world simulations. So these are the parts that went through to develop the project. So the front end database, raw collection, populate the database, and then query the database. So I'll go through those parts. So the front end design, this is basically the web design where there's a main home page. You can have login for users. The users have their profile. The main piece is kind of in between here where you would search the database essentially for ice rink events and information about those. And then you can get you click on those results, get additional information, and from there you could actually purchase a ticket to one of those events. So you basically reserve your place and pay for it, which isn't something that occurs currently for ice rinks. So so in order to support this, database kind of layout was done in MySQL, the workbench. So essentially there's multiple tables. They're kind of grouped into areas. So this is like rinks versus the facility and the actual specific ice rinks at those facilities. There's the types of events that can occur. So those are also done in categories, and each of these event types have like a cost structure to it. Then there is the schedule, which kind of compiles these two parts into a temporal, where each event is basically the calendar information. And then there's also the users that kind of plug in to this whole ecosystem, and those are linked. The users and kind of the events and schedules is linked through the payments. So the users will have payments. The payments are specific to events, and that's kind of where the link between the two starts to occur. And as time went on, these kind of morphed tables and the attributes and stuff as it went. And I'll show how those are populated with actual data later. So the raw data collection, this is an example, ICS calendar. So some places allowed for direct download of the ICS, and I'll show how that was manipulated. But some websites also, and these are each of the websites that were used where the data came from, and they kind of were all in different pieces and ways, so that was a lot of the time spent just sorting through and organizing that. So some were direct download, some parts were just going through and pulling information directly from the websites and compiling those in spreadsheets. So it was basically ICS calendar data, basically visual red data that was compiled, and yeah, that's how the data was collected, essentially, into these different parts of spreadsheets and ICS. And the next part is actually how that data was taken and populated into the database. So the database was created from the SQL workbench and pushed onto the Google Cloud. So that part was kind of completed using this. And then the population would be, let's see. Alright, so get rid of this, go into the actual project here. So this is the instance, the SQL instance that's on the Google Cloud that was pushed up from the SQL Workbench. So this is the data importer. We go to the top, so it's a Jupyter Notebook, basically establishing the connection. And then each of those tables had to be populated. So the categories, basically, let's see. Yeah, so basically we're fetching what you can see these are the tables that were created from the SQL Workbench. So in order to populate the tables, some of them were simple, that it was only a few categories, and that was like hand designed. So the categories was easy. There's 3 versions. The facilities, these were basically manually populated into a CSV. So basically reading the websites mostly through Google Maps and getting this information and populating it in. So you can see that this is from the spreadsheet that was created, and it's basically inserted. It's a bunch of a for loop that inserts each part into the facility. So you can see the data came through, the ice rinks, same sort of type of thing, where it was pulled in from each of the schedules, and the information was kind of understood. Like, so some parts was pulling in from those ICS tables. So you can see here that there's a calendar that's created. So basically from the file, this is where the files are, and these are the names. There was a calendar, and then you can create events. So basically you can populate through a timeline of events using that calendar. So that was a useful little library. So going through, populating the table here with the different ranks, the event types. So those were kind of pulled, same thing from the calendars, the event types, it has that embedded in the events. So I basically just had to compile that and put it into the database under the table of event type. And then going through the cost structure, this took a lot of kind of manual compiling from the websites. So a spreadsheet was created that you can see here, CSV file, and these are kind of how it was laid out. So it basically, it's broken down into like pieces that can affect the cost, or the duration of the event, or the ages, the age grouping. So that had to be built into it, essentially looping through and inserting into the table. User generation was kind of unique, that there was actually an API I found, randomuser.me. So that will give you kind of it's JSON data that will give you a whole bunch of kind of hypothetical randomly created user information. So pulled in 250 of those and kind of broke it down into pieces that may be useful. And then those were pushed or inserted into the table. Groups, this was manually created, types of groups that people might join. That could be content created on the actual website later on, basically linking each of those users, hypothetical users, to hypothetical groups. So that was kind of a random thing created so that we could have that actual data. And then the event schedule, this is kind of the main chunk of data that really focused on. So each of these calendars of all the different ice rinks were looped through and then inserted. Their information was created pulled out and kind of organized and formatted so that it could be inserted directly into the event schedule. So this is compiling from earlier many of those tables. That's kind of why the ordering had to occur like it did, so that it then could satisfy all the constraints of different attributes. So there, so you can see that it was able to input all that data, and this was just, these are the different ice rinks that were inputted. So that's the big chunk that was really done. The payments was kind of a randomized event that was created so that you could populate into the table, so that we had some kind of random payment information. And this was basically, there was a multiple of how many actual events, so that we could get like an average of around 10 payments per event for the data. And this kind of goes through, and there's a lot of constraints at this point with the other tables. So it had to kind of go through and understand how weekdays and ages and stuff like that, so that the actual data in the payment made sense, so that a user who was 10 years old didn't pay for an event where they had to be at least 18. So that it's practical data. And then basically here's the summary. So after all this, there's 7 rink facilities, there's almost 1,500 events, there's 250 users, and then the payments, there's almost 15,000 payments, which are basically unique users at events. So that's interesting kind of database summary there. So that's just creating the database and putting all the information in. So that was a big chunk, creating an actual practical and useful and database there. So then this is what the front end kind of interaction would look like. So this is back to the wireframe and kind of looking at different events or queries that could occur per each of these pages. So we'll go through the home page search in each of these. And this was from the initial project report right up. So basically connecting to that database that we had created that has the populated data. So on the home page, things that we might want to do are just search and get all events of singular type. So here we created, this could be like a front-end simulation that a user would do. And we basically populated this selection here, drop-down menu, from the actual data in the database. So from the categories, getting each of the unique categories. So we could say, let's say pickup hockey, and we want to get all the pickup hockey events that are in the database. So we can go here, it populates that, gets all those events. We can, on the front end, you could understand how you want to actually use this data. Maybe it gets reformatted a little bit for those purposes, but essentially you can pick and choose and get the events based off the type there. So that's a basic kind of understanding of what you could start to do. And then the next part is you could filter and get by multiple inputs different more complex queries that could occur. So you could basically do the stick and puck, so this is the type of event. You can do the arena, so let's do Rockville. You can do the start and end date. You can state your age, because there's age limits to certain events that you can have. So if you go here and you query that, you can get different information off these constraints that are located here. So let's go up, maybe age, nope, didn't matter too much, but maybe if our age is lower. I guess it depends on the location and what the constraints are. But yeah, so you can do different areas there. Oh, normally public skate doesn't have any limits on age. And so let's see if you're 2, let's see if you're 9, you want to go here. There's those events. And if you're older, you can go here. You can see it change. There's a different number of events. So there's that. That's basically querying the data, which is pretty much the main task of the project. And then the login, so you could have basically different login information. So you validate the login credentials. Let's see if we go here and so we also are doing some basic encryption that's happening with the password. So that password was incorrect. So this was one of the users that was uploaded. So basically the password wasn't right. So this is supposed to be the correct password here. Let's see. So if I put that in there and attempt that again. Let's make sure that this is actually the correct. Some of the lower ones maybe overwrote it. And Rupert. All right. Yeah, so success. Eddie Woods, you are now logged in. So that's kind of cool. And there's some error checking that was built in. So this is, if this is the wrong password again, it's Eddie. The password's incorrect because this username is correct. But if that was wrong, one that doesn't, the username doesn't exist. So this is kind of checking on users trying to log in, simulating that. And it works actually pretty well off the database there. So you could create a new login credential. So let's just, John Baker, you can put in your information here. Let's just make sure this goes. So I'm going to type it in, John Baker, username Baker 99999, password, I'm going to do password, date of birth. I don't know when I'm born. Let's do recently. There we go. I'm a male. So if we do that, we can push that in. That was a success. I was testing it before, so let's just change this. If we just to show that it actually worked. How many 9s are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right. Cool. So that actually shows that that was all the information that was pushed up to the database that we're pulling from that. All right. So then you could also list all the payments for a single user. So here's the same guy before. Let's just make sure that guy is collected, and we are pulling all his payment information. So these are all the events he's actually, you could use it also as all the events he's actually attended or signed up for, which is kind of how those two areas are linked together. So yeah, there's that one guy. If we wanted to take someone else, we can go back to the data population. I can find someone else to show on there. So let's do lazy leopard. Let's try lazy leopard. So yeah, got different data from there. You can see from the number 78, 772. Yeah, so you can see that's different information there. Good thing the most, but so then you can also, the next thing that we could do is get the rank most frequented by a user. So kind of their favorite rank. So this goes through, it uses silver leopard again as the example, and goes through and it basically shows which one he mostly likes to go to SkateQuest and Reston. It shows how many times he visits each of these places based off the payments he's made, which is the events that he's attended. And something I didn't go over before, but all these are basically an execute statement of an SQL statement there. And that's been throughout. And very little is done in Python to try to simulate the actual SQL querying of the database as much as possible. So you can get the amount of space framing a specific event. So this is essentially, this is how many people are in it, and this is if that event has a limit, which is part of the data in the back end, connecting several pieces together. So let's see. Another thing we can do is get all the info related to a single event. So this is kind of a basic query that would be on the info page. So now we're down here. Essentially, we went through each of these pages, but now we're down on the info page. So getting additional information about each of these events. So we're connecting together several pieces of the database. So several joins are occurring here, and you can get even more information. But this gives a general layout, basically the facility, the name, age requirements, all that information specifically there. So you can see which, this is an event number. It was just used to show if you were clicking on that event essentially and it had its number associated with it, you could get which groups are represented at that event. So these are kind of the distinct groups represented there. You could do the same thing getting the user names, so, or the users and their names here. So you can essentially, we can change this to just show these are the users that would be attending that event that have signed up and paid, or at least started their process of payment. The payment, this actually having a multi-attribute primary key would have been nice to have better payment kind of confirmation here, and then updating payments, you just do an insert statement. Doesn't really need to be shown there. The total revenue of specific event. So this is additional functionality. So this could be kind of a dashboard maybe on the back end, the marketing, or someone who's just trying from these facilities trying to understand what's going on. So you can essentially say from pick up hockey across all these places between the 30th of July to August, how much revenue was there, and essentially this was the total revenue generated with pickup hockey. So let's do public skate, and essentially it's a different, let's just make sure that's working. Yeah, so you have a different amount total revenue across that time period. So this could be useful just to understand what's going on with from a business perspective. So that's kind of cool, kind of side effect of all of this, that you can start to have these kind of dashboards and stuff like that. So another one is we can display the spread of types of events scheduled by Rink. So at Ashburn, or let's do Cabin John, we can, let's just go through, query that, and then create this plot. So these are, Cabin John really has a lot of public skate, stick and pucks next, and then there's kind of these lower additional types of events that they host. It's just kind of interesting to see, to understand what they actually offer at these places. So you can start to create these graphs of the different information, pull from them, and start to understand what's going on a more macro level. So that goes through a lot of parts of the project. In summary, it basically shows how the database could support this hypothetical wireframe project. So, yep, each of the parts there.